I want to do a video about what's going on in Ukraine. I've been focusing on Asia. I had been talking about Taiwan and how the US is trying to turn that into a flashpoint, a provocation toward conflict with China. And I want to point out how the US is doing almost the exact same thing to Russia, but in this case, using Ukraine. Now, we have to go back a little bit in time to 2013 and 2014. This is when the US overthrew an elected government in Ukraine. Yes, the US did that. They were behind that. And who did they replace the government with? The government in Ukraine at that time was not overly pro-Russia and was not overly pro-Europe. It was kind of enjoying the best of both worlds. And when you think about it, that was what was best for Ukraine's interests, for the people living in Ukraine, enjoying the best of relations with both of its neighbors, Europe to the west and Russia to the east. It made sense. And the US does not accept that. You see them doing the exact same thing with China in Southeast Asia. These countries are being pressured to choose instead of just having a healthy relationship with everyone. The US will not allow that. They did not allow that with Ukraine. They overthrew the government and they replaced it with, in part, neo-Nazis. And when this was very obvious at the time, I'm going to show you how obvious it was. It was so obvious that if you just looked at the Maidan Square, you could see neo-Nazi flags waving around. But the Western media knows that the Western audience is extremely ignorant, and unless they pointed that out, they wouldn't have noticed. And let's look at this scene right here. We saw many scenes like this all across the Western media, and they never explained what all of these flags were. They would say something like Ukrainian flags and European Union flags, but then you had flags like this with this three-finger salute. This is Sloboda. This is a far right-wing neo-Nazi political party in Ukraine. They're anti-Semitic, they're anti-Russian, they're xenophobic, they're racist, and they're a party that could not exist in, say, France or Germany, but they exist in Ukraine. And then there was this flag, this red and black flag. This is actually the flag of a far-right neo-Nazi organization known as Right Sector. And Right Sector is flying this flag, and people may or may not know this. This was actually the flag of the Nazi collaborators in Ukraine who helped the Nazis during World War II carry out some of the worst crimes against humanity ever committed. So this is who the US helped into power. And the US denied this. When Russia was warning people what the US was doing and who they were putting into power and emboldening in Ukraine, the US and the rest of the Western media, they said, that's Russian propaganda. That's not really happening. But then articles like this started trickling out. This is from Reuters. They're definitely not Russian state media. And they said, Ukraine's neo-Nazi problem. As Ukraine's struggle against Russia and its proxies continues, Kiev must also contend with a growing problem behind the front lines, far-right vigilantes who are willing to use intimidation and even violence to advance their agenda, and who often do so with tacit approval of law enforcement agencies. And this is Reuters pretending that this problem is just emerging, that we didn't know about this, and it's just kind of happening now, and we should do something about it. But that's not true. This was going on all the way back in 2013 and 2014. They were the ones who helped overthrow the government of Ukraine on behalf of the US, with US backing. So there's that lie. There's another lie where the US and the rest of the Western media, NATO, they claim Russia invaded Crimea. Now, if you want to know what an invasion looks like, look at what the US did to Afghanistan in 2001. Look at what the US did to Iraq in 2003. Look at what the US did to Libya in 2011. Look at what the US did to Syria also around that same time. Look at what the US does. That's what an invasion looks like. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, their lives destroyed, countries flattened to the ground. That's what an invasion looks like. What happened in Ukraine, and more specifically Crimea, was not an invasion. And you know who told us that it's not an invasion? Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, US State Department funded propaganda. This is an article from 2014. Parliament okays Putin request to use Russian forces in Ukraine. And when they say in Ukraine, they mean Crimea. Russia's upper house of parliament has voted unanimously to approve President Vladimir Putin's request for authorization to use Russian armed forces in Ukraine. The Russian move comes after Putin's office said Moscow will not ignore a March 1st request for peacekeeping support made by Sergei Aksyonov, the pro-Russian prime minister of Ukraine's Crimea region. Crimea, at that time, had a special autonomous status within Ukraine. They had their own parliament and their own prime minister. And the prime minister said, we don't want to be part of a country that is being run by neo-Nazis. We would like to have protection. All throughout the Euromaidan protests and riots and armed violence, I mean, people were being killed. And so Crimea was very concerned about security, and this was not an unreasonable request. Also, Crimea is overwhelmingly Russian. The people there are Russian. They speak Russian. They identify as being Russian. And so why wouldn't they want Russian protection? And eventually, why wouldn't they prefer to rejoin Russia, the Russian Federation? And that's exactly what happened. And this is what the US and the rest of the West and the Western media, this is what they're calling an invasion. They continuously call it an invasion. And I want to point out one other thing, and this is kind of a subcategory of all of this that was going on, and kind of helps explain why Crimea wanted out. This is the Atlantic Council, so they're definitely not pro-Russian or Russian propaganda. And they say how Russia weaponizes the language issue in Ukraine, and what they're trying to do is blame Russia for a language issue in Ukraine. They admit there's a language issue in Ukraine where people speak Ukrainian and Russian. They're kind of similar. But, you know, there's people who speak Russian and Ukrainian, and some prefer to speak Russian more than Ukrainian, and vice versa. And what was going on in Ukraine was because you have these ultra-nationalists now in power, these neo-Nazis have unwarranted influence over the entire country, including areas where people are ethnic Russian. They were trying to do exactly what the US is accusing China of doing in Xinjiang. They were basically doing genocide, except for real, openly, and they were passing all of these laws. There was a language law where they were going after the Russian language. Right here, this language law. And so this was Ukraine literally doing what the US is accusing China of doing with no evidence at all. This was Ukraine openly doing it. And so this is why people in Ukraine who are ethnic Russians wanted out. They wanted to get out. You have these eastern regions of Ukraine that a lot of them now have Russian passports. You have Crimea, which is now part of the Russian Federation. And the evidence supporting these reasons are right here. You couldn't get more anti-Russian if you tried. This is the Atlantic Council. This is Reuters. Okay, this is Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, US State Department media. So when you hear the Western media say, Russia invaded Ukraine, there's no Nazis in Ukraine, no, the people in Crimea had no reason to want to rejoin Russia, it's lies. It's lies that even the Western media has exposed by at least touching on the truth, if only temporarily. Now, getting back to this right here. First, on CNN, U.S. intelligence indicates Russia preparing operation to justify invasion of Ukraine. Well, let's read a little bit of it here. The U.S. has information that indicates Russia has pre-positioned a group of operatives to conduct a false flag operation in eastern Ukraine, a U.S. official told CNN on Friday, in an attempt to create a pretext for an invasion. And of course, CNN never mentions who this person was, who told them this. They never talked about any sort of actual evidence that supports this claim. This is another WMD lie. This is what the US does over and over again. They did it to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. They have already done it multiple times in Ukraine, and now they're doing it again. There is no reason to believe them unless they show evidence. If this was such a serious thing, you would think that the US intelligence community would provide some sort of evidence and make this claim a little more credible, considering their track record of constantly lying and lying in exactly this way. So CNN, they're just doing what they always do. They're telling this huge lie ahead of something big that the West is trying to move into position, just like they were doing in Syria with all these claims of, you know, chemical weapon attacks. They're doing the same thing in Ukraine now. They're trying to accuse Russia of something ahead of something the US obviously has planned. This is very dangerous. And the big picture here is power shifting from west to east. And when this happens, it'll be irreversible. So we cannot underestimate what the US is willing to do to stop this from happening, because once it happens, it cannot be undone. China's rise will be complete, Russia's reemergence will also be complete, and the global south will start rising up and out from under the shadow of generations of Western imperialism. We cannot underestimate what the West will do to prevent this from happening, because their entire civilization is structured around the exploitation of the rest of the world. And something this gargantuan that has been going on for so long cannot just turn on a dime and reorganize itself in a constructive and healthy way. There's going to be a hard crash, and they want to avoid that. And they want to keep on doing what they've been doing. We have to be very careful about this. Cornered animal is a dangerous animal. We have to keep our eye on Ukraine. It was relatively calm there for a while, but now things are starting to heat up, so we have to keep an eye on it. We have to continue watching Asia very closely, and we just have to keep fighting against this tidal wave of disinformation. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing to the channel. It's free to do it. It helps the channel grow. I have a website, newatlas.report. You can find and follow all of my work there. You can find me on Twitter at Brian_Berletic. I'm also on Weibo, and the links to all of this will be in the video description below. Also in the video description below will be all of the articles that I referenced in this video, as well as ways you can help support my work. Now, if you want to do a one-time donation, you can no longer use PayPal. I'm based in Thailand, and PayPal is no longer letting people in Thailand send or receive money. So I have set up a Buy Me a Coffee account. This allows you to do one-time donations. It also allows you to do monthly memberships, just like Patreon, which I also have. All of that will be in the video description below. To everyone who has been supporting my work, whether it's month to month, one-time donations, or even if you're just helping share my work, sending news tips, or a kind comment, I really appreciate that. I could not do this work without that support. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.